February 24th, 2022, 4:47 a.m. Moscow time. Russian tanks cross the Ukrainian border. 72 hours later, something unprecedented happens. Not on the battlefield, in a conference room in Brussels. The West freezes $300 billion of Russian reserves. Gone, with a keystroke. Putin calls an emergency meeting. His central bank governor delivers the news. Russia has been cut off from SWIFT, the global payment system, the financial equivalent of being erased from existence. But Putin doesn't panic, because months earlier, in quiet discussions between Moscow and Beijing, they had wargamed this exact scenario. The plan to survive without the dollar, not with bombs, with code. October 2024, Kazan, Russia. Putin stands on stage holding a BRICS banknote. Behind him, a screen displays a number, 45%. That's BRICS' share of global GDP. More than the G7. More than America and Europe combined. Western media calls it theater. They're wrong. This is the final act of a 50-year war. A war most Americans don't even know they're losing. And Russia just dealt the killing blow to the petrodollar. The Kissinger gambit. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to 1974. The year America made a deal with the devil. June 8, 1974. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger lands in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. No press pool, no official itinerary. This meeting doesn't exist. Across the table sits Prince Fahd bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, the future king. And Kissinger has a problem. 1 year earlier, the Arab oil embargo had brought America to its knees. Gas lines stretched for miles. Inflation hit 11%. President Nixon was drowning in Watergate. America needed leverage, fast. Kissinger proposes a deal. Saudi Arabia prices oil in dollars, takes those billions and buys U.S. Treasury bonds and American weapons. In return, the United States provides military protection, guaranteed, forever. The details of that conversation remain classified. But Prince Fahd understood the implicit message. America has many friends in the region. Cooperation has rewards. Non-cooperation has consequences. The deal was struck. This is the birth of the petrodollar. But here's what they don't teach in economics classes. This wasn't just a trade agreement. This was a protection racket dressed up as diplomacy. The genius of the system. Every country needs oil. Oil is priced in dollars. Therefore, every country needs dollars. Japan, Germany, China. Everyone has to hold massive dollar reserves just to keep their economies running. Result? America can print money endlessly. When the Fed creates $5 trillion during COVID, it doesn't cause hyperinflation. Why? Because those dollars spread across the entire world. Other countries absorb the inflation for us. They have no choice. This is what economists politely call the exorbitant privilege. It's more accurately described as financial colonialism. By 2024, 90% of foreign exchange transactions use dollars. 59% of global reserves are held in dollars. The U.S. national debt hits $36 trillion. Any other country would collapse. But America? We just print more. For 50 years, this system worked perfectly. Saddam Hussein switched Iraqi oil sales to euros in November 2000. We invaded in March 2003. Official reason? Weapons of mass destruction. Muammar Gaddafi proposed a gold-backed African currency in 2009. NATO bombs fell in 2011. Official reason? Humanitarian intervention. I'm not saying these were the only reasons, but the pattern makes you think. The message was clear. Challenge the petrodollar, and you face consequences. But in 2022, Russia did something different. They didn't challenge the petrodollar. They prepared to survive without it. And when the West pulled the trigger on sanctions, Russia was already holding a different gun. The silent preparation. Let me tell you about a coordination that Western intelligence underestimated. We don't know the exact date or location, but based on what happened next, there had to be planning. Deep planning. Imagine this scenario, sometime in 2020, perhaps July, perhaps earlier. Chinese and Russian financial officials in quiet discussions. No grand announcements. No summit declarations. Just technical experts asking a dangerous question. What happens when America weaponizes the dollar against us? This wasn't paranoia. This was pattern recognition. America had been using sanctions as foreign policy for decades. Iran, Venezuela, North Korea, Cuba. Freeze assets, cut off SWIFT. Economic strangulation without firing a shot. A simulation is run. If the West freezes Russia's dollar reserves, how long can the Russian economy survive? The answer, 6 months, maybe. Unless there's an alternative. That's when China presents a solution they'd been quietly developing. Project mBridge. A cross-border payment system using central bank digital currencies. No dollars needed, no SWIFT required. Transactions settle in seconds instead of days. But there's a problem. The technology isn't ready. The Bank for International Settlements is developing it, but it's years away from mainstream deployment. China makes a calculated decision. Accelerate everything. This isn't just a tech project anymore. This is national security infrastructure. By early 2022, mBridge is in advanced testing. 5 central banks are connected: China, Hong Kong, Thailand, UAE. And though it's not publicly announced, the technical specifications are being shared with Russia. February 24, 2022. Russia invades Ukraine. February 26, 2022. The West announces sanctions. $300 billion frozen. Major Russian banks removed from SWIFT. The Western financial establishment celebrates. Russia's economy will collapse within months. Putin will be forced to withdraw or face revolution. They're wrong. Here's what happens instead. Russia immediately switches its China trade to yuan and rubles. Not gradually over months, immediately. Within weeks, 90% of Russia-China trade bypasses the dollar entirely. The infrastructure was already there. They just flipped the switch. India, watching closely, starts buying Russian oil in rupees. Not because they love Russia, because they're terrified they're next. China does $2 trillion in trade with India. Taiwan is 100 miles from mainland China. If there's a war, could India's dollar reserves be frozen too? The answer is obviously yes. Brazil's Lula sees the same threat. America has a history in Latin America. Coups, regime changes, interventions. Could they freeze Brazilian assets to force political outcomes? He starts pushing BRICS for alternatives. Saudi Arabia watches all of this very carefully. They remember Jamal Khashoggi. They remember Biden calling them a pariah state. They remember decades of being protected but also controlled. August 2023, Johannesburg. The most consequential BRICS summit in history. 6 new members invited: Saudi Arabia, UAE, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, Argentina. Notice the pattern? Saudi Arabia and UAE combined around 15% of global oil production. Iran, second largest gas reserves on Earth. Egypt controls the Suez Canal, where 12% of global maritime trade passes. Argentina initially accepts, then their new president Milei backs out under pressure. But the message is sent. The petrodollar's traditional enforcers are considering alternatives. Behind closed doors at Johannesburg, something else happens that we can only speculate about based on subsequent events. China likely demonstrates the full mBridge capability, a live test transaction, perhaps Beijing to Abu Dhabi. Settlement time under 30 seconds, cost nearly zero. Compare that to SWIFT, 3 to 5 days, fees on every transaction, and the constant threat of being cut off if you displease Washington. The technical case is overwhelming. The question becomes political. Who's willing to make the move first? This is when the petrodollar stopped being inevitable. It became optional. The Kazan checkmate. October 22, 2024. Kazan, Russia. This is the moment historians will point to. The inflection point. 36 countries send delegations. 22 heads of state attend personally. For context, the most recent G7 summit, 7 countries, 7 leaders. But numbers don't tell the whole story. Let me tell you what really happened. Day 1, public sessions. Speeches about multipolar world order. Economic cooperation. Western journalists write it off as propaganda. Russia trying to prove it's not isolated. But on day 1 evening, based on what we know happened next, the real negotiations likely occurred behind closed doors. No cameras. No note-takers. Just the leaders who control the future of global energy making decisions that will reshape the world economy. We can't know exactly what was discussed, but we can infer from the results. The proposal on the table: immediate operational deployment of BRICS Pay and mBridge for energy transactions. Not a pilot program, not a test, full implementation. The mechanics. Any BRICS nation can now sell oil to any other BRICS nation in local currency. Settlements happen through mBridge in under 30 seconds. No dollars needed, no SWIFT required. No American veto power. China commits immediately. They're already doing this with Russia anyway. Making it official changes nothing for them operationally, but symbolically, everything. India likely hesitates. Modi is playing both sides brilliantly. Member of Quad with the US, but also buying massive amounts of cheap Russian oil. His compromise appears to be, use the system for energy trades with Russia and Middle East, but continue dollar trades with the West. Hedge both bets. Brazil's Lula wants in, but insists the system must be open to all global South nations, not just BRICS members. China agrees. This isn't about exclusion. It's about providing alternatives. The question everyone's thinking but not saying out loud: what happens when the US retaliates? And here's where Russia's 2 years of sanctioned survival become invaluable. They're the proof of concept, the test case. Russian GDP contracted 1% in 2022, then grew 3%. 6% in 2023, not collapse, adaptation. The sanctions hurt, yes, but they're survivable, especially with BRICS coordination. Now every other member knows exactly what to expect and how to prepare. Day 2. Public announcement. 13 new partner countries invited: Algeria, Belarus, Bolivia, Cuba, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, Nigeria, Thailand, Turkey, Uganda, Uzbekistan, Vietnam. Look at that list carefully. Major oil exporters: Algeria, Kazakhstan, Nigeria. Critical maritime trade routes: Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand. And the geopolitical bombshell: Turkey. A NATO member since 1952, attending a BRICS summit and expressing serious interest in deeper cooperation. Not full membership yet, but the fact they're even at the table sends shockwaves through Brussels and Washington. Turkey controls the Bosphorus Strait. Russian energy to Europe flows through Turkish waters. Turkey is the land bridge between Europe and Asia. If Turkey pivots even partially toward BRICS, it fractures NATO's southern flank. Day 2 evening, the technical weapon activates. China's central bank announces mBridge protocol specifications are now open source. Any country can implement the system. Technical documentation is public. No permission needed from Beijing, from Washington, from anyone. This is the checkmate move. You can't sanction open source code. You can't shut down a decentralized system. There's no central server to raid. No headquarters to bomb. The genie is out of the bottle. October 31st, 2024. 1 week after Kazan, the Bank for International Settlements makes a carefully worded announcement. mBridge has reached operational maturity. We're transitioning control to the participating central banks. The official reason: the project succeeded beyond expectations. The real reason? Agustin Carstens, head of BIS, had stated at a conference, "Projects we build should not be used to violate sanctions." Translation: Washington called. Pressure was applied. The BIS, based in Switzerland but heavily influenced by Western central banks, is distancing itself. Too late. The technology is live. 5 central banks control it: China, Hong Kong, Saudi Arabia, Thailand, UAE. Notice who's absent? Any Western nation. Day 3. And then something happens that doesn't make headlines but should. While we don't have public confirmation of specific transactions, the infrastructure is now operational for oil trades between BRICS nations to settle in seconds using local currencies, completely bypassing the dollar system. The first time such transactions occur, they'll be quiet. No press releases, no announcements. But in central banks across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, analysts are running calculations. If this works for them, why not for us? If Saudi Arabia has this option, why shouldn't we? The dam hasn't broken yet. But every country now knows there's an exit door. And knowing the exit exists changes how you negotiate with the person blocking the entrance. Russia lost $300 billion. But what if China's $3 trillion gets frozen? What if the $10 trillion BRICS nations hold in reserves needs a safe haven outside Western control? That's why America is starting to panic, the American reckoning. Now let's talk about what this means for America. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Consequence 1, the inflation trap. For 50 years, America exported inflation. When the Fed prints money, that inflation spreads globally because everyone needs dollars. But what happens when countries stop needing dollars? Simple. The inflation comes home. Right now, $36 trillion in U.S. debt. Annual interest payments. $1 trillion at 5% average interest rates. That's already massive. We're paying more on interest than we spend on defense. But here's the nightmare scenario. If countries start reducing dollar reserves, demand for U.S. Treasury bonds softens. To attract buyers, interest rates have to rise. 7%, 8%, maybe more. At 8% interest, annual debt payments hit $9 trillion. That's nearly half the entire federal budget just on interest. The choice becomes brutal. Cut military spending by 60% or cut Medicare and Social Security by 70%. There's no third option. The math doesn't work. Your gas prices, currently averaging around $30 per gallon. In a significant de-dollarization scenario, that could jump to $6 or $7. Not because of supply issues, because America would need to buy euros or yuan to purchase oil on international markets. The currency exchange costs add 30 to 40%. Your grocery bills, import costs spike. Food prices could double. Your savings? Inflation eats 7 to 10% of value per year. This isn't theory. This is part of what happened to Britain when the pound gradually lost reserve status after World War II. Decades of relative decline. Standard of living erosion. Britain remained important, but no longer dominant. Consequence 2. The sanctions weapon breaks. America's real power isn't military, it's economic. The ability to shut any country out of the global financial system. Want to pressure Iran? Cut them from SWIFT. Want to punish Russia? Freeze their reserves. Want to influence China? Threaten secondary sanctions on anyone who trades with them? This only works if there's no alternative. If SWIFT is the only game in town. If dollar reserves are the only safe haven. But now, Iran can trade with China through mBridge. Russia sells oil to India through alternative payment channels. Venezuela does business with Brazil in local currencies. American sanctions become suggestions, not absolute law, and when your threats stop working, what leverage do you actually have left? Consequence 3. The protection racket ends. Here's the dark secret nobody says out loud. America doesn't defend Saudi Arabia out of pure friendship. We defend them because they price oil in dollars. The day Saudi Arabia stops needing that arrangement is the day the American security guarantee becomes negotiable. Saudi Arabia knows this, which is why they're being extraordinarily careful. They haven't officially joined BRICS yet. They're testing the waters, maintaining optionality, seeing if America will retaliate or adapt. Trump's response during his 2024 campaign threatened 100% tariffs on BRICS nations that abandon the dollar. Sounds tough, but there's a fundamental problem. America imports $8 trillion in goods annually. About 17% comes from China alone. Combined BRICS nations account for nearly 30% of U.S. imports. If you slap 100% tariffs on that, you're not punishing them. You're punishing American consumers and businesses. Your iPhone price doubles overnight. Your medications, 80% of active pharmaceutical ingredients come from China and India, costs triple. Your Walmart shopping trip costs twice as much. Who suffers more? BRICS nations with a combined internal market of 5 billion people who can increasingly trade with each other? Or American consumers who've become dependent on cheap imports? The leverage is shifting, and most Americans have no idea it's happening. Consequence 4. The unipolar moment ends. Since 1991, America has been the sole superpower, not just because we have the biggest military, because we control the global financial system. Want to trade internationally? Use dollars. Want to save reserves? Buy U.S. treasuries. This gave America veto power over the global economy. But that era is ending, not because BRICS is militarily stronger, because they're providing an alternative that's technically viable and politically attractive. China doesn't need to beat America militarily. They just need to provide a financial system that works well enough. And with 5 billion people in the BRICS Plus ecosystem, they have the market size to make it sustainable. November 2024. Trump wins re-election. His campaign promise, defend dollar dominance at all costs. But he's fighting yesterday's war. This isn't about tariffs. This is about code, about distributed ledgers. You can't tariff a blockchain. You can't sanction decentralized infrastructure. The world isn't waiting for permission anymore. The hidden truth. Now let me tell you what the mainstream media isn't reporting. The parts that change everything. Twist 1. The Petrodollar agreement never existed. And that makes this worse. Remember June 2024? The viral story about Saudi Arabia refusing to renew the 50-year Petrodollar agreement? Complete fiction. The U.S. Government Accountability Office confirmed no documentation exists requiring Saudi Arabia to sell oil exclusively in dollars. The 1974 deal was about military cooperation and investment. Saudi pricing oil in dollars was implicit, not contractual. But here's the twist. The rumor was useful. It created psychological momentum. After June 2024, countries started openly testing alternatives, not because an agreement ended, but because they believed the system was changing. The false narrative became self-fulfilling prophecy. This is information warfare masquerading as economics. Twist 2. BRICS isn't united, and that makes it stronger. Western analysts keep saying BRICS will fail because India and China have border disputes. Brazil doesn't trust Russia. Saudi Arabia won't abandon American protection. They're completely missing the point. BRICS doesn't need to be a unified alliance. It just needs to be available. It's not NATO. It's not a military pact. It's an alternative, a plan B. India doesn't have to choose between America and China. They can trade with both. Saudi Arabia doesn't have to pick sides. They can sell oil in dollars to the west and yuan to the east. This optionality is the weapon. Before BRICS, if you defied America, you were economically isolated. Now, you have alternatives. The cage door is open. Countries don't have to flee. They just need to know they can. And that knowledge changes every negotiation. Twist 3. China doesn't want the dollar to collapse. Here's the supreme irony. China holds roughly $775 billion in U.S. Treasury bonds as of mid-2024. If the dollar collapses catastrophically, China loses hundreds of billions in value. Russia holds mountains of rupees they can't easily spend because India's capital controls prevent free conversion. BRICS nations combined hold 42% of global foreign reserves. Most of it, still dollars and dollar-denominated assets. So why build alternatives? Insurance. China watched Russia lose $300 billion overnight. Frozen with a phone call. No trial, no appeal. Just gone. They learned, diversify or die, build redundancy. Never depend completely on a system controlled by a potential adversary. They're not trying to kill the dollar tomorrow. They're trying to survive if America tries to kill them. But once you build survival infrastructure, others want in. And the more people who join, the less powerful the original system becomes. Network effects work in reverse too. Twist 4. The real war isn't economic, it's about data. Here's what should terrify Western intelligence agencies. mBridge isn't just a payment system. It's an information system. Every transaction through mBridge is recorded on distributed ledgers. Who's trading with whom, what they're buying, how much they're paying, payment patterns, economic relationships, supply chain vulnerabilities. China now has potential visibility into global trade patterns that the US used to monopolize through SWIFT data. They can see who's evading sanctions, who's preparing for conflict, who's about to face financial stress. This isn't just about currency, it's about economic intelligence. And America just lost its monopoly. The final twist, Russia didn't deal the final blow to the petrodollar, America did. By weaponizing sanctions in 2022, by freezing $300 billion, the US forced the entire world to build alternatives. Russia was just the catalyst. The inevitable result of a system built on coercion instead of mutual benefit. You can rule by fear, but only until your subjects stop being afraid. And alternative systems cure fear. The 3 futures. 3 paths forward. 3 possible futures. Here's how this ends. Scenario 1, multipolar decline, probability 60%, timeline 2025 to 2035. The dollar doesn't collapse, it erodes from 59% of global reserves down to 40 or 45%. Still the largest reserve currency, but no longer dominant. BRICS Pay and mBridge capture 20 to 30% of global transactions. Not enough to replace SWIFT completely, but enough that countries have real alternatives. America remains powerful but shares the stage. Like Britain after World War II, still important, no longer hegemonic. Your life? Inflation averages 5 to 7% annually instead of 2 to 3%. Gas prices settle at $5 per gallon. Standard of living gradually declines. Not collapse, but erosion. The slow squeeze. Scenario 2, Cold War II, 0, probability 30%. Trump or a future president goes nuclear on economic policy, 100% tariffs on BRICS nations, full economic decoupling. The world splits into 2 trade blocks. Western bloc, US, Europe, Japan, traditional allies. Eastern bloc, BRICS Plus, representing 4 billion people. Each bloc has its own currency system. Limited trade between them, technology transfer banned, supply chains completely separated, new economic iron curtain. Result, global recession. Both sides suffer. But the question becomes, who can afford to suffer longer? Who has more internal market depth? Scenario 3, controlled demolition. Probability, 10% but catastrophic if it happens. Major trigger event, war over Taiwan. Multiple Gulf states simultaneously announce oil sales in non-dollar currencies. Massive treasury bond sell-off, central banks panic. Coordinated reserve diversification accelerates. Treasury yields spike to 10%. US debt becomes mathematically unpayable. Social unrest, political crisis, potential breakdown of federal authority. Low probability because everyone loses in this scenario, including BRICS nations holding dollar assets. But tail risks exist. What you need to understand, this isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented reality. mBridge is operational. BRICS expansion is real. De-dollarization is happening in measurable percentages right now. The only question is pace. Fast collapse or slow decline. Either way, the petrodollar system that defined American power for 50 years is ending. Not because of Russian aggression. Not because of Chinese ambition. But because empires built on financial coercion eventually provoke alternatives. The Romans debased their currency. The British lost reserve status. The Americans weaponized theirs. History doesn't repeat exactly, but it echoes. And right now, the echo is deafening. 50 years ago, Kissinger flew to Jeddah and created the petrodollar through incentives and implicit threats. Today, Putin stands in Kazan holding a BRICS banknote while Xi Jinping watches approvingly. The circle is closing. The age of unchallenged American financial dominance is ending. The final blow wasn't dealt by Russia's military. It was dealt by mathematics. You can't maintain infinite privilege forever. Eventually, the world builds alternatives. The petrodollar is dying. Not with an explosion, but with encryption. Not with a bang, but with a blockchain.